Welcome, everybody. I'm so sorry that we're not in person in Inverness, but the online environment allows us to welcome you all on Facebook Live as well. This XpoNorth session is devoted to life writing. How do you shape recollections and choose facts when it comes to writing about your own lives? We're going to be joined by two acclaimed writers as they talk about how best to frame a personal story in an original way. My name's Jenny Brown. I'm a literary agent based in Edinburgh, and it's a real joy to be talking at this event with these writers. Cathy Rentzenbrink is the author of The Last Act of Love, also of A Manual for Heartache and Dear Reader, The Comfort and Joy of Books. And next month, she publishes her first novel, Everyone is Still Alive. Cathy speaks and writes regularly on life, death, love, literature, literacy, and mental health. And she's often doing events at festivals and in shops and in libraries and prisons. In her previous lives, Cathy worked for the Bookseller magazine, the reading agency, Quick Reads, Waterstones, and a pub, the Bell and Crown Inn, which she may well talk about. Amy Liptrot has published her work with various magazines, journals and blogs, and she's written a regular column for The Court by the River, out of which her memoir, The Outrun, emerged. As well as writing for newspapers, including The Guardian and The Observer, Amy's worked as an artist model, a trampolinist, and in a shellfish factory. Her powerful and inspirational memoir, The Outrun, was awarded the 2016 Wainwright Prize and was shortlisted for the 2016 Wellcome Prize. Welcome to you both. We're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and we've got a chance for you all who are watching to ask questions. You just use the chat function or the Q&A function, and we will try and pick up as many of your points as we can towards the end of the session. But first, Cathy, can I ask you to start off by telling us about how you came to write memoir?
Well, it is a very good question. I often think of myself as an accidental memoirist. I think I wanted to, I know I did want to write novels. I was always writing novels, starting novels, giving up on writing novels. And one of the reasons why I would stop writing novels was that the biggest thing that had happened to me, which was when I was 17, my brother was knocked over and then was alive for another 8 years before eventually dying. That would keep, I was not trying to write novels about that, but that would keep intruding into the novels. So the furthest I ever got was chapter 7. And then on chapter 7, somehow he would arrive on the page sort of demanding to be heard. I was trying to write sort of smart, funny young women novels. And then they would this sort of like bomb would go off in chapter 7, and then everyone would start dying or having horrible brain damage or whatever. And I just wouldn't get very far. I now think, obviously, this is the advice I like to give everyone, like if I just cracked on and finished a rubbish novel when I was 20, that would have been so good for me. But I kept giving up. And eventually, when I was, I think, probably about 41, in my early 40s anyway, I then did decide actually I had to write this. But I didn't set off thinking it would be a published book. I set off with the aim to just write it out of myself, because to hope that it would liberate me for other things. And then some point during the writing process, I mean, probably quite early on, it did occur to me that it did feel almost like it was wanting to be shared. But the interesting thing about that book, I think, and I think this is true of lots of people with memoir writing, I could never have finished it if I'd envisaged a reader. Like, I had to write it in secret for the draw. But actually, I would never have been able to finish it without the presence of a reader, because at some point it flicked from the one state of affairs to the other. And it was the idea of a reader that gave me the stamina to push on through to the end.
How much support did you have during that writing process? And at what stage when that switch flicked, was that when you had an agent, a publisher?
Probably was, actually. I mean, I was really lucky in that I had this great friend who, well, I mean, he wasn't a friend. He was an author I met on a British Council trip to Korea, which I do write about in the book, called Tom Palmer, And he writes children's books mainly. And we'd met on this trip. We were talking to Korean librarians about the importance of reading for pleasure. And he just sort of appointed himself. I think various people had been kind of kind to him in his writing journey. He just sort of gave himself the role as my encourager. I just still look back on it and think, what, like just how, I just, as you can see, I'm just still incredibly moved by the sort of his generosity. So I had him, and then he was sort of nagging slash, as he would say, bullying, but of course it was just wonderful to me to do it. And we came up with an agreement that I would write 5,000 words a month, and then at Christmas we'd see where we were. And then he was just replying to me. I'd send them to him, and he'd say, like, "This is great, crack on." He was very big on, don't worry about what it is, don't think about anything, just write it all down. And then, of course, I did get an agent who was, again, really encouraging. And then my editor, when the book was acquired, it wasn't finished. So my agent and I both felt like we knew it needed work, but we didn't quite know what. So she felt it was the right time to try to get a publisher. That's my agent, Joe. And then my editor, Francesca Main, was and remains, as well as everything else she does for me, the most incredible reader. And she motivates me. I emailed her today because I'm writing another novel. And I emailed her today and said, how would you feel about me saying that I might just share like 20,000 words with you in 3.5 weeks' time? And she emailed straight back. And now I feel, again, with my work in progress, I wouldn't have liked to have that in the diary when I had no words, but I've reached the point now where I start to anticipate the pleasure of having a reader. I think loads of writing is working out when you need to be private and when you don't. And it's really, and I'm still, I've written loads of books now. I'm still fine-tuning that and working it out all the time.
You published your first memoir, The Last Act of Love, and it was really well received. And then at what stage did you decide that you wanted to, I suppose, distill what you had learned and the kind of feedback you'd had from readers into the next book, A Manual for Heartache?
Well, it grew very organically out of conversations with readers, really, which I think is for me, that is the major privilege of writing, I think. I definitely think, and again, I didn't know this at the time, and I've refined this over writing a few books, and most writers don't feel like me, by the way. Lots of people just want to finish it and let it go and whatever. I definitely feel that every book I've written is almost like the opener of a conversation. It's the first bit of the conversation. And then I love it when people respond. And of course, in memoir, that can often be very difficult because it is very personal. So it's not, there were times when I did feel overwhelmed by, it always felt like a privilege. But at one point, I just didn't quite know how to cope with the fact that a lot of people were telling me really sad stories. And then I learned. But that for me that's the great bit. But I don't think I even fully got that. But it was the second book grew out of, it was the conversation. So writing the book taught me a lot about what had happened, myself, the world, grief and loss more generally. But it was the conversations I had with people afterwards. And where, Amy and I were both on the Wellcome Prize together. We did lots of events. Some of that was really profoundly intellectually stimulating to be, that's quite fascinating, the way you get sliced and diced and put with other writers, sometimes a little bit bruising, difficult, overwhelming, but also it gives you all these new ideas suddenly. And it's, again, I'll admit, really peculiar that suddenly I thought, like, oh, people think I'm an expert. Suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm talking about this on the radio. And then after a while thinking like, oh, but I do know quite a lot of stuff that's worth writing down. So that's really how that came about. And again, I think a lot of writing is about intention. So I wouldn't ever regret that book because lots of people have told me that it's been really helpful to them. And I wrote it with the intention of being helpful, which actually I'm not sure is the best intention for which to write something, but it did work for that little one.
And then Dear Reader, which people on the outset might just think it's a sort of a list of books, but actually I would categorize it as memoir as well, because it's you and it's your life and these lovely suggestions. Do you want to give us a flavour of it?
Yeah, I'll just read you the first 2 pages. So I mean, I think the publishers have done such a beautiful job with the cover. Dear reader, I'm lying on the floor of my new house in Cornwall surrounded by boxes. I'm supposed to be unpacking, but my back hurts. And I've remembered some advice I was once given, to lie flat on the floor with my knees bent and to put a book under my head. The book is a big blue hardback that contains all 4 of Daphne du Maurier's Cornish novels. Rebecca is my favourite. I think about the story. The timid girl whose name we never get to know, who is working as a companion to a demanding woman in the south of France when she meets and marries newly widowed Max de Winter. He is twice her age and breathes experience and wealth. She goes back with him to Mandalay, his beautiful house by the sea, where she walks among the azaleas in her garden and frets about how inadequate she is compared to Max's dead wife, Rebecca. Like me, the girl is a bit of a scruff. She worries about not having the right clothes and that her hair is a mess. We also have nail biting in common. I hold my hands up and look at them. The skin around both my thumbs is red raw. How many times have I read Rebecca? 10, 20? I don't remember the first, but I will have been younger than the girl then. And now I am older than Max de Winter himself. I'm feeling my years today, tired and worn out from the stress of moving. It's the right thing to come back to Cornwall, to be close to my parents. But so far, all I've done is not obey the law of nature, but empty boxes, stare at my phone and watch the ongoing soap opera of politics. If I were reading a novel, I might find it enjoyable, though unrealistic. It would be funny if it were a satire. It does me no good, I know, to be too close to this absurdity, to be continually confronted with evidence of the folly and vanity of my fellow humans. I need to find a way through to stop spinning myself out over things I can't control. And as I lie there, surrounded by boxes, looking up at the half-filled shelves, at the books that have followed me from place to place, I find my answer. I will be my own doctor and prescribe the best medicine, a course of rereading. Something shifts in my body. I feel better already, just at the thought of turning off my phone. This is what I've always done. When the bite of real life is too brutal, I retreat into made-up worlds and tread well-worn paths. I don't crave the new when I feel like this, but look for solace in the familiar. It is as though in re-encountering my most loved fictional characters, I can also reconnect with my previous selves and come out feeling less fragmented. Reading built me and always has the power to put me back together again.
Lovely. I defy anybody to hear that and not want immediately to discover the Daphne du Maurier on their shelves. But Cathy, there's so many points that come up with that. And one of them is, does a memoir have to tell your whole life? Or can you approach a memoir kind of obliquely and tell a slice of life? But before answering that, can we turn now to you, Amy, and to hear about how you approached the writing of your memoir, The Outrun? We'd love to hear it.
I think the book kind of emerged out of a couple of different bodies of writing, one of which was the sort of nature columns that I wrote for Caught by the River that you mentioned to begin with, about different aspects of bird life and the sky and sea life in Orkney, where I had recently returned to live. So that's one side. And then the other kind of body of work was a blog that I'd kept the year before I came to Orkney, during the time that I was in rehab, that I was in a treatment centre for alcoholism for 3 months. And it was kind of combining these two, the more outward looking, thinking about the place, and the more inward looking at my addiction and recovery, that kind of came together. And I decided to try and make it into a book. But I'd always written, and I kept a diary for all since I was a little girl. So it was only natural to me that when some more difficult or dramatic things happened in my life, that I would write about that as well. And the columns, the nature columns were published online, and they were usually about building dry stone walls or outward looking things, but I began to have one or two little mentions in them about what had happened in my recovery, and they were quite well received. I got some nice feedback from people, and that really encouraged me to continue to try and write the whole book, which I did. Funnily enough, I've just was in touch with my editor from this book today, who sort of pointed out that it was quite unusual that I'd written the whole book before I kind of went and tried to get it published or even found an agent, which she pointed out today is quite unusual from her side. But I think I was just quite sort of single-minded and felt like I had something to say at that time. Yeah.
Can you give us? You're going to, I think, give us a reading from the start of it. Just to
sure. As this is an event about memoir, I thought I would read the very first prologue of the book, which really lays it out there autobiographically, as you'll see. Under whirring helicopter blades, a young woman holds her newborn baby as she's pushed in a wheelchair along the runway of the island airport to meet a man in a straitjacket being pushed in a wheelchair from the other direction. That day, the two 28-year-olds had been treated at the small hospital nearby. The woman was helped to deliver her first child. The man, shouting and out of control, was restrained and sedated. Orkney, a group of islands at the north of Scotland, sea-scoured and wind-battered, between the North Sea and the Atlantic, has a good provision of services: hospital, airport, two secondary schools, supermarket. One thing it does not have, however, is a secure unit for people certified mentally ill and a danger to themselves or others. If someone is sectioned under the Mental Health Act, they have to be taken south to Aberdeen. Seen from above, from an aircraft carrying oil workers out to a rig or mail bags from mainland Scotland, the airport runway is a jolt on the open treeless landscape, regularly closing for days during high winds or sea fogs. It's where the daily drama of leaving and return is played out under air traffic control among the low-lying isles and far-reaching skies. This May evening, as daisies shut their petals for the night, guillemots and kittiwakes return to the cliffs with sand eels for their chicks, and sheep shelter beside dry stone dikes, it is my story's turn to unfold. As I arrive into this island world, my father is taken out of it. My birth, 3 weeks early, had brought on a manic episode. My mum introduces the man, my dad, to his tiny daughter and briefly places me in his lap before he is taken into the aircraft. So sorry. That was my mum. My mum introduces the man, my dad, to his tiny daughter and briefly places me in his lap before he is taken into the aircraft and flown away. What she says to him is covered by the sound of the engine or carried off by the wind. And that's how it starts.
Such a dramatic start to the memoir. Extraordinary. And Amy, when you came to write the book, how did you decide on the structure of it? Because you interweave your life in London when you were an alcoholic with your time in Orkney, both as a child and then, but mostly as somebody who is having the most extraordinary jobs. Actually, the corncrake wife, I loved that, as a bird warden. So how did you decide how to tell the story, how to let it unfold?
It really changed when I was writing it. To begin with, I kind of thought of it more as a collection of essays, maybe more based on different aspects of island life. So I kind of grouped it into an essay about the corncrakes, which is an endangered bird that I had a job looking for, and about the small island Pape, where I went to live for a winter, and then things to do with geology and to do with renewable energy. So that was initially how I structured it. But as I maybe went into the second draft and began to write more to fill in some of the gaps, it became a little bit more like a conventional autobiography, kind of starting at my childhood and going through my life, up to the point, up through drink problem, being in treatment and returning to Orkney. But I think maybe the combination of that more traditional autobiography with the themed chapters is kind of what made it a bit unusual in the end. And then after that, actually, I did some work with my editor, Jenny Lord at Canongate, with splitting up some of the timelines and kind of introducing some tension and making like splitting up the London bits and the Orkney bits to kind of keep Orkney at the forefront, I suppose, and just make it more readable and more, maybe enjoyable is not the right word, but to make it a more rounded experience for the reader, I suppose. Yeah. So it definitely changed.
Yeah, we might have started off, the memoir might start off with that early childhood scene, but it is an unconventional structure. And should we just dive in, Cathy, as well, about structuring a memoir? Now, as an agent, I see a lot of people who are attempting life writing for the first time. And what, of course, many people do is they will start off with their birth and just go chronologically through their lives, or even start off with their parents' birth. And I always think about a colleague I had who said, every story has got a start, a middle, and an end. And the place to start is the start of the middle. What are your thoughts? What's your advice for anybody who has got a story to tell, how best to structure it? I mean, obviously every story is different, but I think we've come to expect, I suppose, a more tricksy approach to life writing now, rather than the conventional start at the beginning, go through your life.
The main thing I think, and I think this is quite sophisticated and difficult to get your head around, and I didn't get my head around this for my first book, by the way. The main thing I think is actually grasping that the order in which you write the book is not the order in which the reader will consume the book.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes right at the beginning of the process, you need privacy, you need to follow your nose creatively, and you just need to get some words down. I remember I went on this great residency in a place called Cove Park, and one of the nice things about it is you're not just with writers, you're with other artists, and it was really stimulating. One of them was a potter, and I was talking about this, and she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "it's just like laying down clay, isn't it?" And all the visual artists were saying things like, "Oh, I spend ages just," somebody who worked with fabric that said like, "Oh, I would just cut up shapes." And I think often with writing, we really forget, because when you consume writing, you're always consuming it. Again, if the writer and editor have done their job, it should read like it was quite easy to do. You should just, when you read Amy's book, I'm quite a fast reader. I could read Amy's book in 3 hours in the bath. And because she's good at writing and she's edited it well, I feel like that she probably sat that down and wrote it in 3 hours. But of course she didn't. And I think that's the mystery and stuff. That's the secret, really, how you tolerate the chaos and the confusion of the writing, knowing that you have to get some stuff down. And that for me, writing is a very organic process from which structure, shape, and even theme will emerge. And then, yes, usually when it comes to the editing and the reader's experience, at that point, you're going to need something usually different from, I call it that I was born under a wandering star. Or as you say, when people start tracking back into the parents and the grandparents, the old heart often sinks. But I think it's helpful, to think of memoir very much not as sort of a soup to nuts autobiography, but it's an aspect of a life. It's a lens through which to view a life, if you like alcohol or reading or insomnia, or that's another way of looking at it, or it's a specific relationship or experience.
Would you agree with that, Amy?
Yeah, I think for me there's a slight distinction between maybe memoir and autobiography, that a memoir might be looking at a particular aspect of a life rather than attempting to describe it all. And even for me, I wrote this book when I was in my early 30s, but it still would have been, there's so many time periods and jobs and boyfriends and things that are not mentioned in this book. I've focused in very much on my relationship with alcohol, and that's the lens through which I'm looking at even the bits about my early childhood. Yeah, and sometimes I've thought everything that Cathy said was really good. I just gathered together lots of fragments, and then there's something from there that I will pull out to bring to the start that is the most exciting or pertinent or useful. So it's certainly not it's for me, it's a fragmentary process rather than an A to Z process.
Given that both of your memoirs and often memoir is about difficult or traumatic experience, how do you know when the best time to tell that story is? Do you leave a significant amount of time before you're ready to tell that story? I have been in a situation of working with writers, and it becomes clear that in fact there's no resolution. They're still in that situation, even though it might have happened some time ago. I'm not trying to say, Cathy, that you were through your grief, not at all, but that the time was right for you to write about the loss of your brother, or the time for you to write about addiction and recovery. Amy, have you got any advice for new writers about that?
Well, again, I would really separate out the writing from the sharing. So I think, and I didn't often do it when I was younger, because when I was younger, bad things would happen and my words would desert me. Whereas actually recently I've been more able to do it. And like everyone, I've had some pretty hefty stuff to deal with over the last year. But I have actually managed to write about it, but never with the sense that I'm sharing it with anyone, certainly not yet, and maybe not ever. So I think it's really important. As I get further on in my own practice, I get much more aware of the difference between writing as something I do, and that then eventually writing is also something. It's a shame in a way, it's the same word. Sometimes I distinguish between like small W writing, which is the self writing in the notebook for the self, and capital W writing, which is like dressed up writing, going out into the world. But the more I work, and actually I think that's something that probably happens to you post publication, because once you've had personal work out in the world, you know what that feels like, and you kind of can't forget what that feels like. So I'm always really fascinated by journalists who write really quick response pieces to news articles where they will, so there'll be I want to give a non-specific example, but so someone is convicted of some horrible crime, and the journalist will write a piece that's about that, but that also includes quite a lot about how they suffered from that. I mean, I couldn't, and I'm not in any way criticizing the people they can. It's an art and a skill. I absolutely could not process my own relationship with both the material and my own willingness to be on the record with, working out what I think and then what I want to share. It takes a long time. So I would always encourage people to write down what you can about what's happening at the moment, but be aware that the composting, I think of it as composting, the time at which that's going to turn into something shareable might take quite a long, maybe a long time, or not, I suppose, or not. But I think I just think it's complex and helpful to distinguish between them, because I talk to a lot of people who are stuck because they don't want to share, and the way that you fix that is do it for yourself.
How helpful is it to have written those memoirs for both of you? Amy? Does it allow you some, I don't want to use the word closure, but some kind of resolution about that period of your life?
Yeah, I think to carry on from what Cathy was saying, I sort of separate the writing from the the finishing of the book and the redrafting. And I'm really glad that I wrote when I was still craving drinking and still in those really early stages of recovery, because I recorded just how painful it was. And then by the time I came to finishing off the book, or maybe reading it at an event like this, I no longer feel like that. And that's given me huge understanding of how far I've come, to have a record of that intense time. And also it's rewarding for me to have created something, made art out of something that was difficult, I suppose. Yeah, but the work, talking about the Outrun, the work itself, with my addiction, was being done. That was not being done on the page. That was being done, with my counsellor and in my life. And the book itself, I see as a piece of constructed art, rather than a straight kind of account of therapy kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you about finding the balance between what you share and what you keep private. And we've got a first question from Jeff, who asks, was there anybody you felt was really important to your story who didn't want to be included? And if so, how did you deal with that? Cathy, can I ask you about that first of all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, really important that you don't let worrying about this stop you writing anything at all. Mm. So there are very few, but there are a couple of books that I know of. There are very few books that don't exist because the author couldn't work out how to deal with the complexities of the real people in them. But there are loads of books that don't exist because the author didn't write them in the first place, because they thought they wouldn't be able to deal with the complexities of the real people. So there's various fixes, both technical and emotional, for all this stuff. So I think the main thing is to almost like write your book first. I think, and it's almost, I don't know whether this is true in a way, but it's like the more the book means to you, I think the more important it is that you have your best version that is honest and true to the integrity of what you're trying to say. Then you have to both craft it as a reader experience, and then you also do have to think about the real people stuff. There wasn't anyone who didn't want to be in my book, but again, I made a decision. I made it really close. So I don't think I would have done it without the goodwill of my parents, which I had. But the main characters are in it are me and my parents and my brother, who's dead. There were a lot of the sort of second tier of people. I mean, lives are full of people, I think, and books, both novels and non-fiction, always have fewer people in. And often that's something I think you don't realize when you're starting out. So people just don't know that they're not supposed to put in 3 pages of, and then I went out to have a drink with my 6 best friends, all of whom said this, and it's just, that's craft, isn't it? That's just learning that there's a way to step around things without without telling lies. And if anybody wanted to, if you did look at my work, look, for example, about what I say about my son, what I say about my husband, you'll see that there is an authorial sleight of hand there. I'm giving the illusion that you don't want to leave open loops. You don't want to leave the reader thinking they've been shortchanged. But there's a way in which usually what I choose to tell the truth a lot, completely, about the aspect, about the lens. And then there's lots of other stuff off stage. I don't think that one of the things I like to think about is this notion of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do broadly aim for the truth, with the caveat, of course, that that's subjective. But no, I don't try for the whole truth, and you don't want the whole truth. Boring, also unnecessary, but also you don't owe it. The fact that you're writing about yourself honestly in one area does not mean you owe the people don't need to know everything about you and don't deserve to know everything about you. And then nothing but the truth. Again, I don't make stuff up. I don't really lie. I'm not saying actually that you shouldn't, and I hold myself, I think, to quite a high moral standard. So you need to find your own way, dear listeners. Don't necessarily think you have to do it my way. But that's the way I sort of have it straight in my own head. And then, practically, I mean, in general, I think it's almost more difficult leaving people out, because if you leave people out that are significant, to the plot, the real life events. I did have two conversations with people who'd been very closely involved, but who I wasn't putting in, and I felt that was courteous to say, I've not put you in.
Mm-hmm.
Quite tricky that. But in general, I think people really like being in books. My friend Nina Stibbe is very funny about this. She says that in her experience, you can say pretty awful things about people as long as you note their general attractiveness, sense of humor, kindness to animals, etc. So certainly no one's ever been upset, I don't think, with the way that I've represented them. I think about it a lot. I put a lot of effort in, but it tends to work out.
Yeah. How do you approach this subject?
Yeah, I really love what you're saying, Cathy. I think you've put into words kind of a lot of my approach as well. But I think there's something that happens that even if you don't put that much in, readers still think they're getting the whole truth, because it's a human tendency to sort of join the dots and kind of, you just might have put a couple of details about a figure and they, you kind of want to think you know them. With the Outrun, there was one kind of conflated character who's a number of different friends kind of put into one person. And there were also at least people that so little is said about them that they're not identifiable as an individual, I suppose. And also I think there's probably people who I've had in my life who are disappointed that they're not in the book. They've turned the pages and they're not in there. So I think it goes both ways.
Can we turn now to your next projects? Amy, you have got another book coming out. Would you count it memoir? Writing about nature, called The Instant.
Yeah, haven't really spoken about it yet, so I'm just need to figure out a way of talking about it. But yeah, it's certainly based on my own experiences, particularly of a year that I spent living in Berlin. Sometimes when I'm feeling particularly poetic, I say that The Outrun is a book about water on skin, and I think this one's going to be a book about sunlight on stone. That's kind of one of the guiding principles. But it's a lot about looking at the natural world in an urban context, but then also using some of the ways that I've developed of writing about the natural world for writing about people and relationships, and at its heart, the book has a love affair. So yes, nature writing with sex in, and yeah, I'm just getting my head around how to talk about it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it brings us back to that point, Cathy, doesn't it, about this, that memoir can be a slice of life. It can be a year. It can be, saying, about Dear Reader, it's a look at a life through books or reading. And I wonder if you just want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, that it can be a really helpful way to sort of almost organise your thoughts and your material, to have a sense of your lens. One of the things I did, my problem, and lots of people think this is a nice problem to have, is I just have like millions of ideas. But the problem with it is they're just always crashing into each other and not behaving. And I still, I find it an utter miracle that I've managed to tame linear narratives out of myself, because like it feels to me still like I just sort of sit here with all this buzzing and this network of strange stuff in the air above my head. So what really helps me, I do see there's a question from Felicity saying, what if you know the start and middle of the story but can't see what the ending will be? I'll just pull that in, because no one really, I don't know, most writers I know don't work with the start, the middle and the ending like at the beginning. Don't expect to have that. You just need to find a way of putting the words down. And I think knowing your lens or knowing your theme, like obviously in Amy's project, it's Berlin, and like that for me would be the way I have to think about a project. Sometimes a project for me I don't even know whether it's fiction or non-fiction. I just know, like for my novel, I just knew that I wanted to write something about marriage and parenting. And then for various reasons, mainly including the problem with the truth and not wanting, and in that case, actually, not wanting to be, you know, my husband and son are real living people. So not feeling that it was right for me to write honestly about them, actually. And that's a little bit to your question about when it's right to do things, because they're works in progress. You know, this is ongoing. I don't want to write about my own stuff as it's happening in a way. So I've chosen to do that fictionally, but I didn't know for ages. I didn't know that that was going to be a novel. I just knew that you know, so sort of theme and lens for me comes a long time before any conception of what something's going to be, or what the start or the middle of or the end of it is, or how to slice and dice it. I think it's really interesting that Amy's saying she's not yet used to talking about this. And that too is part of the process, that you have a relationship with the book up until a certain point, and then other people get involved. And then I haven't really talked about my novel very much yet, and I know I'll hopefully get used to doing it, but at the moment when people ask, I'm a bit like, you know, I sort of trip over my words, because that's another, I've come to see that too is part of the creative process. Again, it's another way, a different way of having a relationship with the material. So I find it endlessly fascinating, all this stuff. The thing I always desperately want to tell people is kind of just, it is confusing and it is chaotic, and don't think that that means that you shouldn't be doing it, and don't think that that means that you're not good enough. You know, most of me giving up on books was because I would just convince myself I wasn't talented enough. I thought that if I was talented enough, I'd find it easier. And what's changed is not that writing is easy. I still find it unbelievably hard. I have to make huge sacrifices to be able to do it. But I now just know that's the nature of the beast. I'm not expecting that if I was better or different, that it would be easy. So I think all of that's all in my mental world today. Hope it is useful to you.
We're getting quite a few really interesting comments and questions in. Rebecca asks, do you think a memoir can be as powerful if it's not focused on something monumental that happened in life? Can it be about a lifestyle and still pack that punch? Amy, can I ask you about that?
Well, recently I've been thinking, maybe for what I'm working on now, about life writing that's kind of not centered around something difficult or trauma, but about writing that's guided by pleasure. And lately I've been myself writing a lot. I've got a baby and two babies basically, and I've been writing about life with them and the kind of the pleasures that I have with them, particularly outdoors, and slightly that to kind of guide me. And in terms of published books, I think things like there are travel memoirs or books about moving to new places that are not about something terrible happening, you know, that can be very readable and have plot and suspense, and so I think it is possible, and perhaps there should be more of it, and it's what in fact I myself I'm trying to work on at the moment. Yeah.
Interesting. Cathy, what do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. And Dear Reader is, you know, I was intentionally trying to keep that sort of like light and breezy, but not facile and saccharine, if you see what I mean. I think all books really that are going to work, and I can think of many that don't, need some kind of light and shade. So even books that are quite difficult will have they'll have some lightness, they'll have some humor, they'll have, you know, sometimes it comes from resolution. Sometimes in a difficult things memoir, it's just like, hey, I'm still here, I did survive all of this, you know, but you need something. What I find is really interesting about working with people, so like, yes, please do write your memoir in which something bad has happened, and also feel you can write your memoir about the bad things, because it's really interesting when you've got a group of people who want to write. Half the room is worried that not enough bad stuff's happened to them, and half the room are worried that too much bad stuff has happened to them and it'll be grim and no one will want to read it. So I think one of the beautiful things about memoir is it's a really broad church. There's also lots of tonally different treatments, like, so, you know, book could be have quite difficult subject matter, but actually be very funny. So there's that kind of thing. So I think it's basically all there to play for, and it's all about trusting it's all really about trusting that it's your own way of seeing the experience that's the important thing, not really what the experience is. We don't read Amy's book specifically because we want to find out about Orkney or alcoholism, even though both those things are interesting. We want to know what Amy thinks about these things. And I was thinking, like, so many times today already, I love that prologue. I've never noticed before quite so much. Like, I love the way she does it. We've got lots of things in common in our autobiography and the way we write, but like the way she talks about the guillemots at that crucial moment, like, I would never make that reflection. And the way she talks about, you know, the Outrun is about water on skin and this is about sun on stone, like, never in a million years would I make, I just wouldn't, my brain doesn't work like that. But that's why writing is so great. And that's what you need to do, all of you, is find what's your, and again, doesn't matter whether you like nature or don't hardly notice it. It matters that you find your way of seeing, you know, giving us what you see through your lens.
Thank you. We've got some very practical questions here. Can I please ask, at what point should you involve a reader, an agent, or publisher? How many drafts were created before any of the above were employed in the process?
Well, as I just mentioned, for me with the Outrun, I'd written the whole thing before the whole thing, the first draft, a completed manuscript, before I approached any agents. And I think I felt that if I wrote it well, good enough, that it would do that would do the work for me. It wouldn't be about I would be able to sort that out if it was good enough, and I should put the work in before that point. But perhaps looking back, that was a bit mad, and I could have spent quite a lot of months of my life and it not getting anywhere. And there are definitely other approaches. But similarly with my forthcoming book, I had written pretty much a good full draft before I sent it to my agent or my editor at Canongate, because I didn't have the full idea of what it was going to be until because they might well have commissioned me just on a proposal, but I didn't have just on a short or a sample chapter. But for me, the book didn't have a sense of what it was going to be until I'd written the whole thing. But for some people, I think that you could probably have a bit more of a structure from a smaller amount. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because that was rather unusual, because Cathy, as you said earlier, many memoirs, non-fiction books are commissioned on the basis of a really good proposal and, say, sample chapters, maybe 15, 20,000 words.
Yeah, but again, I don't know what my book's going to be about until it's finished, and there's no way I can't write a pitch. I can't write a proposal. Actually, that's not true, because I did do it I've written a book about writing, all these things we're discussing, which is coming out next January. I wrote a proposal for that book, but that's because I'd been teaching a lot, all the information was in my head. I kind of knew what I wanted to cover, but that's the only time I've ever been able to write anything like a proposal. Usually I have to write the whole thing, and then it becomes more clear to me what it is and what I just, like, so many books could be such a, even like when it's like The Last Act of Love could be really different books. Different publishers would have put a different, there's still lots of different possible outcomes for it. And that's, I think, what you're working out often when you're writing. What do I want this to be? I think it really depends as well on what sort of person you are and what your relationship is with exposure. So I would say be really careful about protecting those tender green shoots of creativity. But if you're the sort of person that's motivated by attention and praise, then by all means have a writing group. But if it makes you feel, I often feel, sharing stuff before ready, I equate it, and actually sometimes when it is ready, being published can feel like this a bit sometimes, I feel like a slug and someone's about to tip a great load of salt over me. So you've got to be really, you don't want the tender, creative, slug-like bit of you to shut up shop because it's scared of the salt dousing. So that's, but all of this, I think, almost more than anything else in writing, is entirely dependent on what sort of person you are. Because I'm also collaborative by nature. So now that I have the perfect reader in my editor, but as I said, I'm going to send stuff to her, but I won't send it to anyone else. And that was the same with my novel as well. She saw some really, she's my secret keeper. She knows how rough my first drafts are. But I don't share it with anyone else until really, really, really late in the process. Because I know I've got the relationship with her. I know it's going to work. It's not going to make me down tools, shuffle off, hide under a hedge.
In your on your shelves there, Cathy or Amy, in your background, what are the memoirs that have really inspired you, or that you would recommend to anybody who is wanting to write their own lives or a section of their own lives? What are the books that you would really recommend?
So I'm just looking for it on my... I just reorged my shelves and they've moved. I Am by Maggie O'Farrell, I think. Oh, it's so good. And the thing is, it's not chronological. And one of the things I think actually about the whole thing about writing chronologically or not, it is hard. It's hard not writing chronologically for... I tried to write Dear Reader not chronologically, and I honestly just thought I was going to go mad. And so if you read it now, it's got that short prologue in the virtually the near present, and then it does go back to the beginning. It's not complete by any means, but I do it chronologically. So I always recommend I Am to people, just to watch a master. But again, I always give the warning that the thing is, she is a master of her craft. She's written 6 or 7 novels. She really knows what she's doing with time. And I think it's a bit like yoga, like when you do yoga, what, and I always sort of say, like, we read Maggie O'Farrell, but if you try to do that, it's a bit like starting off with those really adventurous toe stands. Don't be surprised if you fall flat on the floor. But yeah, I love that. And Lem Sisay's memoir, My Name Is Why, I thought that's quite interesting because he uses a lot of documentation in it. I really love The Boy with the Top Knot by Satnam Sangera. Again, very hard subject matter in that, but also loads of jokes, lots of lightness, overall sort of tone of joy. So those are some of mine.
Oh, just before I turn to you, Amy, dialogue in memoir, recreating dialogue. What is your take on that? I think it trips a lot of new writers up. How do they recreate what their characters are going to say, and so that it feels true?
I always think it's good to have dialogue. What I say to people that are getting tripped up by it is just write it like a script for now. Just write it out with, Bob, and just write down what they say. And often people, I think, especially with dialogue, are trying to do too much at the same time, which is often the problem with memoir. So I tend to just try and get the content down, and then you can kind of build it up later on. And that thing Amy said earlier on is really true about how you might, if you give the right 2 or 3 details about someone, you can trust the reader to flesh it out in their head. Often I think people, when they're beginning, are trying to be too completist. So they worry that they can't remember all the conversations they had with someone. But I always say, like, well, if you could remember all those conversations and written them down, I would be now saying to you, we've only got room for half a page of this in the whole context of your memoir. So you now have to cross out those 20,000 words. So it's a little bit like that. It's almost about realizing how you don't want pages and pages, and you don't want every conversation. You probably just need, it's working out what are the most important ones and then just writing them down as scripts and fiddling about. That's sort of the way I do it.
Amy, what are those memoirs that have struck you, inspired?
One that just came to mind is called The Chronology of Water by Lydia Yuknavitch, who wrote a book called The Book of Joan. But she's just a total badass, and she has had quite a difficult life, but she's also a swimmer, and the way that she writes about it is really good. And then there's also a book by a professional swimmer called Swimming to Antarctica by Lynn Roper. And I never thought that I would enjoy a sort of technical sports autobiography so much. It's got a lot of detail about the training that's involved in order to swim the channel and to swim in cold water. And I find that, and also the politics involved in swimming between Cold War America and USSR. So I recommend that one.
We've just got 4 minutes in which I'd love to hear any other top advice you could give to anybody who is just wanting to get their story out and feeling a bit stuck.
Just do it, is what I'd say. Just do it. Don't be worried that it's complex, difficult, tricky, hard. I think the whole way we talk about writing in our culture is that it's somehow something that happens magically to those people who are gifted enough to do it. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. And I think it's much better to think of writing like you would think of marathon running or mountain climbing, that you'd expect to have to invest in a bit of kit. You'd think you might have to do a little bit of training. You wouldn't necessarily expect to be able to do it straight away with no preparation or thought. So that's the thing with writing. Certainly that's really what's made the difference to me, and sort of accept it as my arena, if you like, accept it like it's, but I read The Hunger Games with my son, where the characters have to go into this arena, and it sort of like blew my mind. And I thought, this is it. From now on, I'm going to accept that writing is my arena. I don't know what I'm going to find there. There's going to be sort of exploding poisonous wasps, but every so often there'll be a new medicinal herb I didn't know I existed. So I sort of, so I can't overemphasize, I think, the nature to which I do think, I mean, writing takes it out of you. You need to be, I've realized, I need to be match fit for it as well, even though it's just sitting and having a type. I have to really think about how I look after myself, my physical health, my mental health. That's why I think you should do all those things. But I really think you should do it and try to separate the writing from the sharing. And that's not just advice I give to people who aren't published yet. Actually, most of the writers I know who are published and who are working and who are sane, it's because they've got quite a good handle on how to focus your attention on the meaning and purpose of the work itself, rather than the reception, the success, the judgment, all that stuff. That's why the arena is so difficult. All that stuff's hard.
Amy, Hunger Games for you?
I think what maybe helped for me is, as well as those things that Cathy is saying, is starting to get my writing out there in smaller form than the whole book. So having maybe starting a blog, or I got a column on a nature website, or even Facebook posts or tweets. Might not be for everyone, but just kind of testing the water a bit and getting some responses back. And for me, that was very encouraging to continue. And sort of linked to that was finding a community, a kind of writing community, which for me is still kind of based around like the Court by the River website and the sort of nature writing world of people that were interested in similar things, and a sort of peer group, which I'm sure, people involved in XpoNorth or whatever, your geographical area or your particular interests, you might be able to find a community that will support you and nurture you. So that's what's helped me.
Thank you so much. Great advice. We're out of time. I'm just going to let the last comment come from somebody who's just put this in the Q&A box. Not a question, just a thank you for such an amazing discussion and session. Extremely helpful. Thank you. Thank you both, Cathy and Amy, for being so generous and so inspiring. Just do it. That's the take home from what you've been saying. But really appreciate the time you've given and the generosity.
Massive pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for your questions. Thank you, Cathy.